Okay, perfect. So welcome to I don't think it's week 5 anymore, right? I kind of forgot what week it was. But this lesson was originally supposed to be scheduled for a few weeks ago, but then due to like some scheduling issues, it got moved to this class. But yeah, so we're gonna be talking about structure and form. So this is a really exciting class that I'm excited to teach you. So, to begin, we're just going to do a very quick Google form. And I just kind of want to get a sense of how you feel about the class, if you like it, if you don't like it, and then what I can better do as like creating the curriculum and also like as a teacher. So, let me see if I can put the form in the chat. Um, and then I'll give you like a few seconds to fill that out. Okay, I just put it in the chat.
Okay.
Okay.
Um,
Just let me know when you're done.
Okay, I just finished the form.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Um, Great. So now I think you asked some questions about the Word Up anthology.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say, so if you want to be included, I think we'll like make a more comprehensive form, or I'll just
Okay.
you can just tell me like which specific pieces you want me to include in that, and then we can go from there. Yeah, does that sound good to you? Do you have any
Yeah,
questions? Okay. Then yeah, we'll talk about it more at like the later classes when you're more complete with your portfolio.
okay.
Okay, and then now let's go over the week four review. So I'm actually not sure. I guess this definitely wasn't last class, but do you remember why we use figurative language, or like three reasons why we might use figurative language?
Um, we use figurative language to make one thing is we make it to make our writing more interesting and like engaging. And then um we also use it to like sort of like emphasize certain like important like points like climaxes or like turning points. Um what else? Also no, that's the other thing. And it can also I think it could also make it sound better. Like for example, like if we use like alliteration, it can make it like sound also more interesting.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. That's spot on. So yeah, I just want to emphasize like the main three things I was thinking about was being able to kind of like repeat certain ideas or motifs, and to also like highlight or bring out different parts of the text. I don't know if you were there for the class, but the example was
Oh,
like makeup and like highlighter and everything.
oh
Maybe
yeah.
you remember the eye. Yeah, and then also to like kind of introduce complexities to the
Mm.
text. Um, so yeah, this week we're going to be doing structure and form. And I think the easiest way to see that is through poetry because it's a little more obvious and a little more apparent through poetry. But I think yeah, we use figurative language in the most important moments, which is like the beginnings, the endings, the turning points, like you said. And that's kind of a more like formulaic way to approach it.
Mm.
But I think you can expand on it a little from there. Like once you get the basic points, you can
Yeah.
kind of yeah, break out of the shell. Yeah, so perfect. Yeah. And then now for our lesson, I wanted to start by asking, what do you think structure and form is?
Um, I think like structure and form is how we like organize the writing into like a way that like the reader can understand easily. Um, and like how the story, how the plot is like structured. So like, um, and also like how like the text is structured. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So like kind of how everything is organized, like stanzas, how like a piece of writing is set up, everything like you said. So perfect. So yeah, so structure and form in general is kind of a broad subject, but especially for poetry, we can kind of break it down into a few key factors. So the first thing is line breaks and line length. So sometimes a line is cut before you actually finish a phrase, and sometimes you have longer lines for pacing or shorter lines if you have more like of a rapid effect. And then the second thing is use of space. So that can be both in like the positive and negative sense. So you can have a lot of blank white space, or you can kind of black out certain words, and then both of them have different effects. And they're also different types of poetry. And then the third is the overall arc of your story. So there's like every variation, sorry, my dog is talking, but every variation of like a plot structure. So if you've ever heard of like Plot Mountain from elementary school, there's like exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and then conclusion. So that's a very simple version, and you can go much more complex with different types of plot structures. And then also general formatting. So for language, for poetry specifically, you can kind of consider like the movement and the shape of the piece as it's presented on the page. So like poetry, you can write it in like spirals, or you can shape it in waves or any sort of shape. And these shapes are often intentional by the poet to kind of convey a certain message. So this piece is actually not actually prose, not poetry. And I think it's pretty funny and also kind of sad at the same time. But when we're thinking about line length, we want to think of it kind of like breathing. So when you're breathing quickly or you're breathing in like short breaths, there's a sense of kind of fast paced and like hurriedness. Or not even just speed, but like a sense of action and movement. And a lot of small things are kind of happening at once. But when you have longer sentences, you have more commas and like longer lines of thought, then it can feel more like calm, like reflective, as if you're really kind of considering the piece. So one example from the prose piece, I don't know if you want to read it.
Yeah, I'll read it. Um, the house is not without its rivalries. My good omens keep eating each other. The frogs eat the crickets and the ladybugs. The cat escapes and tries to eat the frogs. The house smells like urine. I buy a whole turkey from the supermarket and dig for the wishbone. I break it in half and come away with both the good end of the bone and the bad end, one in each hand. I'm achieving equilibrium.
Yeah, so I want you to notice how there are a lot of like short sentences, right? And because they're very short, it doesn't really feel like the author is reflecting on what they're saying. And instead, it presents an image of chaos. And like all of these things are kind of happening all at once, and the author doesn't really seem in control of it. And then finally, that most important last sentence is kind of longer than the other ones that come before it. And it kind of slows you down and then it brings you into a shorter sentence. So that again creates contrast. And I think the length on the most thematically important line is doing a lot of work for the piece. So yeah, so now we'll talk about line breaks, which are kind of similar to line length, but also different in a different. So think about where you're breaking a line. And in poetry specifically, this is called enjambment. And this is one thing that you can use to create double meaning. So for example, if you see on the right hand, I have a poem, and there's a line that says, I learn my body as fight. And if you only read that first part, you get like one impression of the poem, right? And then you can continue reading or flight. So like if you see fight or flight, again, you get like two different meanings. You get another meaning as you keep on reading the page. So before you go down the page, you're given one idea, and then when you read on, you're given another idea. And that kind of creates that sense of like double meanings. And then line breaks can also create a double effect, like a sense of movement. For example, if you have a line that breaks on like swinging up and then continues with under, creates another kind of visual up and down motion in the reader's mind. So that's technically not a double meaning, but it creates like a dynamic kind of movement and like physical effect.
Mhm.
And then although line breaks are specifically poetry device, breaks in general can you can apply to all different forms like prose as well. So like in prose, a very well-placed paragraph break can make a final line of that paragraph very impactful or even dramatically more impactful. So even if you don't love poetry specifically, you can also apply this to prose as well. Okay. And then white space kind of accomplishes a similar thing to line breaks. It can basically disrupt ideas or break them up. So in prose, you'll usually use paragraph breaks, and you can start a new paragraph when you're introducing a new idea, when you're moving to a new setting, or when you're introducing a new character. Anything that's pivotal usually gets its own paragraph. And the exception is dialogue, which is just a formatting convention. And then white space can create a very kind of deliberate destruction of ideas. So, for example, I have a poem on the right, which is called Poem for Brad, who wants me to write about pyramids. And there's kind of a white space right in the middle of the poem, and that kind of disrupts the poem. And you could think of it as like the white space represents the person that it's being addressed to, just standing in the way, right? The poem's consciousness would flow very smoothly if not for that, white box that's just sitting in the middle of it and really interrupting the flow. And the white box is a disruption that really stands out. So, space can also work as a buffer. So when you pause before you say something very important in your speech, it allows you to really emphasize the moments that you want to create impact. So I can give you like a few moments if you want to read the poem on the screen. I think it's a very interesting one.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so let's move on to black space. So, white space is central also to blackout poetry. So, this is kind of called an erasure poem or like a burn poem if you want to be very cool and hip. So basically, you take like an existing text and you can kind of black out or erase certain words, and then what remains is a new poem in a way. And it's very commonly associated with censorship, and with like self-erasing forms, where basically you write one poem and then you kind of black it out into a new poem, and then you black that blacked out poem into another poem. I think that's called a burning haibun. And it lets you basically take an original text and then provide your own interpretation of it. Or it kind of invites the reader to see the same material in different ways. So that's definitely a very fun form of poetry to explore if you're kind of more unsure of how to like start writing your own. Just finding a poem out of something else, I think is very cool as well. So that's a lot about kind of structure. And then now we'll talk more about form. So form is mostly for prose, but it can also apply to poetry. And you really want to think about how you want your story to work, how you want it to come together, or kind of start over at the beginning. And think about the narrative map of your story. So if you were to actually kind of draw out the arc, like how would it look? And then form usually correlates with a story's theme or idea. So you've probably heard of the basic plot mountain, like I mentioned before, from elementary school. But if you actually look at a novel and break it down, it's not going to be that simple, right? It's not going to be just like plot mountain. And if it was, then it's kind of boring or repetitive to read a novel that follows the exact same structure every time. So yeah, there tends to be a lot more bumps in like a normal novel. Some stories map out a hill that like dips negative and then like rises positive and then dips again and then ends on like a hopeful note. Others kind of maybe start in a circle and then they start and end in a similar place. But by the time that you reach the ending, you kind of know so much more about that opening scene that the environment or this place just takes on a very different meaning. So this is also called the Disney arc. So an example of that is like if you were to think about Coco, do you know that movie, Coco?
No.
It's basically about like a boy who kind of ventures into the land of the dead. So he like dies for a few hours.
Oh,
Yeah, do you remember? Maybe
no.
you should watch
I
it.
didn't.
It's a very good movie. But yeah, the boy's aunt kind of destroys his guitar. And then he ends up in the land of the dead, and then he meets all his relatives. And then he finds out that the person he thought was his great great grandfather is actually an imposter who's trying to kill him. And then he kind of exposes the fake grandfather. He finds his real one, and then he makes it back to the land of the living. And then he makes sure that his real grandfather isn't forgotten. So most of the time it's happily ever after, and that's basically the Disney arc, which is you start with a problem and then things get worse before they get better, and then you end on a more hopeful note.
Mm.
And then there's some stories with a more like cyclical or like hopeless theme. And you'll often see a circular structure like Fahrenheit 451. I don't know if you read that either.
What is it about? Wait, I feel like
It's
I know.
about like firefighters burning books. We're reading it in our
Oh,
English class, so I'm not sure if it's like maybe more of a high school book.
I think I had a friend who read it, but
Mhm.
I don't think I've read it myself.
Okay. Another recommendation. Yeah, so that's basically where the protagonist rebellion is destroyed, but then he like walks off into the wilderness and he ends with almost less than he started, but there's still kind of continuation. So the structure mirrors the theme. So I want you to think about the form when you're thinking about like a story and your story's themes and ideas, and really think about kind of what arc fits what you're trying to say. And then just some overall notes about form. And just I want you to keep these in mind at a more like conceptual level. So you have long phrases. So long phrases basically give the idea of reflection. Short phrases are associated with like action and movement. And you always want a general story arc that relates to your theme. And then know how blank space works. So it functions like a pause, a breath, or like a deliberate gap. And then line breaks can kind of accomplish a similar effect and also create double meanings.
Mm.
Well, yeah. So now we can write a short poem. So this template kind of comes from a poet who used it for a class of second graders, but I think we can handle it as well. So you can just I don't know if you have a doc open. Maybe you can open a
Oh,
doc.
I have a dog.
Yeah.
Hold up.
Okay. And you can just pick like anything that you want the poem to be about. It could be about anything like monkeys,
Okay.
like SpongeBob, yeah, anything. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so you can just follow the template, um, and kind of that will create a poem in and of itself.
Okay.
Okay, do you want to read it out loud and I can
Yeah,
like,
sure.
okay.
Dancing Squishmallow. My name is Leslie. Today I feel like a beautiful squishmallow dancing in the sun. Sometimes I'm a sweeping squishmallow. Sometimes I'm squashed, but I'm always squishy. I ask the world what will make me happy today, and the answer is to be a beautiful squishmallow dancing in the sun.
It's very nice. Okay, yeah, so we're gonna take that poem, and then yeah, then we're going to do an activity where you kind of practice using either like censorship or like kind of burning each or burning specific words from it to create a new poem. And then also kind of changing sentence lengths or variation. Or you could kind of use unique formatting to change it into a new shape. So, yeah, do you understand kind of how you might black it out on the doc? I think you've listed that.
Yeah, but I just have it in black.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
And do you think you could share the doc with me so I can
Oh
see
yeah,
it?
sure. Actually, I will do that right now. Um,
And I can maybe give you another poem to also like censor
okay,
out.
I think I know, sent it to you.
Okay.
Let me see if, okay.
Okay, yeah. I can also paste in another poem that might be easier to black out.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So
Okay,
I think,
thanks.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
posted
saw it.
an excerpt from East of Eden. So it's
Mm,
like a book by
yeah.
Dickens.
Oh. Okay. Mm,
Okay. Do you want to read out your blackout poem?
yeah, sure. Um, Sometimes lights up a man. It happens to nearly everyone. It growing or preparing, a fuse burning toward dynamite. Lived all his life in the gray, and the land and trees of him dark and somber, trooped by faceless and pale. Um, and then the smell of the earth rises, dapping light his eyes. A man pours outward, a torrent, not diminished.
Yeah, that's really good. I think John Steinbeck has already very like kind of poetic writing, so even just taking a piece of his prose and like even blacking some parts out can make a very nice piece. So I hope that was fun. Um, yeah, okay. So I think we're definitely going to end the class a little earlier today. But I just wanted to end with homework. So a few things is, um, so the homework for today is to kind of take a poem that you've written about in a previous week and then try to rewrite it using either changing the form or using censorship, like the blackout poem we just did, or either adding sentence variation or like line breaks. Basically just practicing what we learned today. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. If you have any questions, just ask. But otherwise, I hope you have a great week.
Okay. Bye. Thank you.
Bye
Bye.
bye.